Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. My name is Huma Umar and I'm currently a senior at NYU Abu Dhabi where I'm studying social research and public policy with concentrations in public health and gender studies. And this past spring and summer, I was a Gallatin Fellow for Human Rights. Um, and Today, I'm really excited to be sharing some of the things I've been thinking about over the course of this fellowship with all of you. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person because I'm back in Abu Dhabi for my senior year. And so I'm going to be doing this presentation virtually. And right before I get started, I just want to say a big thank you to Professor Dina Siddiqui, who was my independent study mentor, for the fellowship and just a really wonderful mentor all around. And a big thank you also to everyone over at Gallatin for making this possible and the rest of my cohort because it was a really great experience learning and unlearning alongside all of you over the course of the fellowship. And so this past summer, I've been working with an organization called Sakhi, who are based mostly in the New York City area. They do a lot of work in advocacy surrounding various forms of gender-based violence, but particularly intimate partner and domestic violence within the South Asian community in the city. And the team that I was working with was the anti-violence program team, and they're often the first responders to people from the community that reach out looking for any resources or services over at Sakhi. And so a lot of my work was a lot of direct services work, which involved kind of helping survivors safety plan for what their future looks like, helping them identify their needs, helping them identify resources that would meet those needs, and then supporting them as they navigate those resources. And so there's a lot of different things that came up over the course of my work with Sakhi. And I'm going to try to go through some of those as concisely as I can. And the question of, I think, how survivorship is politicized was one that I anticipated before I even went in to work with Sakhi. And I think it became increasingly evident the ways that this plays out in the lived experiences of the people that we were working with. And so in a lot of cases, there's a whole range of interlocking factors that impact each person's experience, experience of harm and abuse, and experience of being a survivor of that harm and abuse. And some of these kind of interlocking factors look like people's ethnicity, the kind of languages that they speak, their religion in some cases, their immigration status in the US in a lot of cases, their job security, and all of these factors meant that every person's journey as a survivor was very specific and very individualistic. And so a question that I found myself asking the people I was working with was, what does effective safety planning even look like when there's no particular blueprint to go about it? And I don't think there's a perfect answer to that question, but I think if I were to talk about a couple of things, one would be kind of tapping into the inherent power of the community. And I think that's important in any kind of human rights work, but particularly for gender-based violence, which is such a isolating and lonely experience. The power of the community, both as a support system and eventually as a system of accountability and as a system of harm reduction, is especially important in any survivor's journey. And I think more and more safety planning work is kind of, and safety planning and anti-violence work is kind of built on building those communities. And I think something else that often came up was kind of reducing the harm that would come from utilizing other structures that existed, especially to protect survivors from the violent gender-based violence that they were facing, but would end up harming the survivors sometimes even further, or exacerbating the harm that they were already going through. For example, a lot of survivors were very uncomfortable with the idea of calling the police on the person who was causing harm to them. And so a lot of safety planning work was about having more attuned responses that respected each survivor's experience of individual gender-based intimate partner violence, but also the kind of harm they felt they would face from state structures. And I think this brings me to the question of funding, especially because we all know during the COVID-19 pandemic, gender-based violence was often at the forefront. And so there was a lot of funding that was coming in to organizations like Sakhi. And I think this is a global phenomena. And so since the pandemic has died down, the funding has also died down, even though the number of people looking for services and coming to organizations like Sakhi hasn't died down. And so what do you do in circumstances and what do you do to self-sustain survivor-led movements like Sakhi while being kind of independent of the structures that you have to depend on to sustain yourselves, but eventually ones that don't always pull through. And I think an especially interesting question that I've been thinking of since then is, how do we make our legal system especially responsive to all of the different various factors that impact a person's experience of gender-based violence? Because most often the only thing that's inscribed into law is their experience as a gendered body and as a gendered person. But how do we make it responsive to all of the various other factors that gender-based violence often works in tandem with? And so yeah, those are some of the things that I've been thinking of as I was working at Sakhi, and since the fellowship has, since the internship has ended. And I think that's the question I'm going to leave you all with. Again, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.